Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today we have on the show Ben, Ark, and Rabble, and we talk all things Nostr and social media in this episode. For those of you that know them, but if you don't, Rabble was one of the early creators and worked a lot on what would become known as Twitter, which he talks about, and actually employed Jack Dorsey and worked with this whole crew on kind of the early stages of what would go on to become Twitter. And Rabble also has a Nostr client called Nostr Social, which we talk about as well. And he's been in the space a lot, doing a lot of things in social media and just coding and developing and really building in this space. So really excited to be able to talk with him and have his expertise on. And Ben, Ark, is also on as well to talk all things Nostr, and created a Nostr Twitter clone and worked in the early days with Fiat Jaff on all things Nostr, and works on LN bits and all sorts of cool Lightning and Bitcoin hardware and software wallet stuff. So this is a really, really fun episode for me. And we got to talk all things social media and Nostr, as I mentioned, but also all things just society and how we interact with each other and connect with each other around the world. And it got a bit philosophical as well towards the end, and we could have kept going on and on and on. And I'd be excited to do another episode with these two great guys. So really hope you enjoy the episode. And as always, you can reach out to me with any feedback on the episode. You can reach me at hello@progressivebitcoiner.com, and be sure to follow along with Ben and Rabble on their work as well in the show notes. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you again next week. Ben, Rabble, welcome to the show. How are you guys doing?
Very great.
Awesome.
We had synchronized coffee drinking then.
Yeah. Very different time zones, but both drinking coffee. This is
for different reasons.
Yeah.
A boost in the morning for Rabble and a boost in the afternoon for me.
That's right. Well, cool. So a lot of folks listening will probably know who you both are. Some might not. I mean, our podcast is kind of pulling in, ideally, some folks that are kind of in the mainstream normie world, maybe not involved in a lot of these social media, Nostr, Bitcoin conversations. So before we go in too far, do you both want to introduce yourself? And maybe we can start with you, Ben.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ben Ark. I work on a free and open source wallet account system in Bitcoin called LN Bits, which is predominantly Lightning based. Then we have an extension framework, so we're able to roll out a lot of cutting edge stuff. And one of those extensions, a marketplace, was one of the things which went into influencing the creation of Nostr. So I was very keen on Nostr early on. And I was quite involved in the community, made the first kind of Twitter clone of Nostr, and then baggednostr.com. And we have a bunch of Nostr extensions in LN Bits as well, which I'll probably talk about a little bit later on. But yeah, just been around Nostr for a while, and took a little break for a while. But then when we had that Nostr renaissance at the beginning of the year, suddenly all our Nostr projects had a lot of momentum. So that's been great to see them evolve and develop.
Yeah, awesome. Rabble, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm Rabble. I've been around the space of trying to build social media apps and protocols for a long time. I was the first employee and sort of lead developer at Odeo, which is the company that where Jack Dorsey also worked, where we pivoted from making a podcasting app to making Twitter. And through that work and others, Twitter had this giant careening sort of thing of, is it an open protocol? Is it a centralized platform? And there were times in which it was very open. And as it became more centralized, I kept looking for open alternatives. And so that's how I came across the Secure Scuttlebutt protocol about 6 or 7 years ago, which was one of the inspirations that Fiat Jaff used for making Nostr. And so I originally discovered Nostr not because of the Bitcoin stuff at all, but because it was one of the protocols inspired by Secure Scuttlebutt that would give us an open protocol social ecosystem. And now I make an app called Nostr.social, which is a Nostr app. And really excited.
Awesome. Thanks to you both. And so obviously this podcast is The Progressive Bitcoiner, but the more conversations I have, the more I get into the space and have these conversations, the more excited I get about freedom tech in general, decentralized tech, decentralized internet. So a lot of those conversations are being had through here and many other Bitcoin type podcasts, and Bitcoiners care a lot about this. And I would argue everyone should care about this. So, Ben, starting with you. So you do a lot of Lightning development, Bitcoin development. Where and how do you see the connection between things like Nostr and between the spirit of things like Bitcoin?
I think it's important to remember that Nostr isn't Bitcoin.
Yep.
And early on in the Telegram group, there was a couple of Bitcoiners who were doing their usual Bitcoin ranting, who actually kicked off the Telegram group for talking too much about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So that's quite funny. But obviously, it's built predominantly by Bitcoiners. But it's an absolute pleasure to have non-Bitcoiners come into the Nostr space and then bring all their energy and then all their different perspective as well. But clearly, micropayments, being able to make tiny little transactions through a social network is incredibly powerful. And when you're looking at censorship resistance, like the project which we work on, one of the projects is a Nostr market, and being able to have censorship resistant micropayments without trusted third parties and without the need to sacrifice your personal information when buying things on a marketplace peer-to-peer is very important. So it goes. Bitcoin isn't, no, Nostr is not Bitcoin, but they go together like bread and butter. But I would like to see some more diverse payment methods within Nostr. I'd certainly like to see Zaps improved. I think they're a very powerful technology, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement. But yeah, they just go very well together, and it's hard to fight using Bitcoin in Nostr, even though originally we intended them to be kind of separate. Nostr was like our little holiday from Bitcoin at one point.
Yeah, it's like, oh, keep working on Bitcoin, but we need something. There's always new and exciting things to build in Bitcoin, but I completely agree. And I listened to your recent episode on Peter McCormack's show too, and I'll try not to repeat too much of that. But for folk, go back and listen to that episode too. I think it's really good. And one of the things you say is, have shitcoiners on Nostr, have so many different people on Nostr, and continuing to push that message that Nostr and Bitcoin is separate and is a different thing. And Nostr is one of those things that right now I think it still is I don't mean this negatively, but in an echo chamber, right? It's such a small community.
Absolutely. It can't be a Bitcoin echo chamber. Yeah. We went to the Freedom Forum in Oslo, and I was onboarding activists, and Nostr clearly makes a lot of sense to activists. But as soon as they would open a Nostr client, you would just be a load of Bitcoiners talking Bitcoin shit, and they were really put off by it. So Rabble has some great work on that, on trying to connect people properly so they actually engage with the people they're interested in. So yeah, it's currently it's kind of an issue that it is a bit of an echo chamber, but that it will all improve. They're all problems we can't not solve.
Yeah, and that was going to pivot to my next point. Rabble is some of the things you've been talking about and working on, and you're super. Obviously, I think both of you, but Rabble especially, have a vested interest in just social media in general, like seeing all the different phases and versions of what social media has looked like over the past several years, even before that, with different cypherpunk movements. So for you, we can talk Blue Sky, Mastodon, like all these different instances. So how do you think about this world of not only Nostr, but just decentralized social media and, the connections that you're trying to make between, everyday people, but also people who are using all these different platforms? How do you approach this work?
So, I think that for a long time, those of us who are working on decentralized social media protocols were, off in the obscure edges of GitHub, basically. Like no one, everyone's like, well, those are all interesting. Those are fun to play with. But, there's someone who rewrote the Gopher protocol as a web alternative. And a lot of the decentralized social stuff sort of felt similar to that. But we were always saying, no, it's a real problem that our digital spaces, our public spaces, are one, exist for surveillance and advertising, and two, essentially controlled like a shopping mall that we don't have any rights to. And so we've been working on Nostr, and there's a lot of it which I really, really like. But my overall goal is that we get decentralized social protocols that are community controlled so that we can have a commons that isn't controlled by the state. And so, or monopoly corporations. And I think that Nostr is going to bring that, but I think that we're going to get interoperability. Just yesterday, I did a PR for the NOS app that lets you, when you put in a username to search, can look up any Mastodon user and follow them just as easily as any Nostr user using Alec Gleason's gateway. And it's like actually not hard. Like it took an afternoon of coding so that Nostr is just the Nostr app works as part of the Fediverse, but where you really control your data and where you can build applications on top of it. And so it gets us that larger community because, I went and sat down with dinner with some folks last week, showed them Nostr, walked them through it, and they're like, ugh, Bitcoiners. Whereas, they wouldn't be opposed to the stuff that let you use lightning payments to raise money and fund stuff and use, they don't want to oppose to using it, but they don't want to hear about it. It's not their community. It's not their culture. And so we need to figure out how to get that new user experience, that app experience, that user discovery experience that let people find their own people. Yeah. And, to me, good financial payments and a good financial system, that's useful. I'm glad it's there. But I'm not there because of it. And I think most people are not going to be there because of it. Most people are going to be there because they're into swing dancing or whatever it is that's their thing.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I want to break down too a couple of ones. So first of all, I mean, a lot of what we try to do is just have these conversations, but I also try to interject every now and again and say, okay, our audience here and kind of our ideal audience or our niche space is talking to progressives, people on the left, people more in mainstream, maybe aren't as technical or aren't already in, that Bitcoin dominant culture or a right-wing Bitcoin culture in the US, that kind of thing. So I'll just speak for myself, a lot of my friends, myself and my wife, many others really just frustrated with Elon Musk, with Twitter, with all of these things that we're seeing with social media. And so for me, there's a natural connection between a decentralized web built for advocates, protesters, just people who want control over their own media, their own social experience, all of this, and something like Nostr or those kind of open protocols. But a lot of folks on the left can also start to, these narratives pick up quickly. It picked up with Bitcoin being, for criminals, for right wing, quote unquote free speech apps in the US get designated as a right wing cause far too often, right? From the left mainstream and the right. Well, I mean, gosh, it probably happened forever ago in a lot of ways, but a lot of it kind of progressed a lot with Donald Trump speaking about Truth Social and saying, I am being discriminated against on other platforms. So come to this other application, which also has all the same problems, right? All the same mechanisms of control and can be turned off and on, all of those kinds of things. So there's a lot of people on the left that would probably be fed up with Twitter, X, and then navigated to something like Blue Sky, right? Which I've dabbled with, played around with a little bit, and I think there's different issues with Blue Sky than Nostr, and both have different issues they're facing. So when you think about progressives or the left or people that care about those certain values and social media experiences, how do you try to articulate it to them? And then, Rabble too, I know you've engaged a lot with Blue Sky versus Nostr. How do you see the differences in terms of the challenges both of those protocols face? Well, we talked about the challenges of Nostr, but the challenges of Blue Sky too.
The challenge, I mean, the fascinating thing is a lot of the underlying goals of the technologists working on Blue Sky and Nostr are the same. Like the Blue Sky team has been working on decentralized social protocols for a long time. They also worked on secure scuttlebutt and were inspired by it, just like Viatchov. They want this open protocol. They want there not to be a organization that's deciding what speech should or shouldn't be there. But Blue Sky started out from a top-down perspective. Think of it kind of like Java or Android or, even maybe the Linux kernel, where it's very tightly controlled who's doing it and how it's being run. Whereas Nostr, because of its cultural origins in the Bitcoin community, started out open by default and is the bazaar. And so, in many ways, that's created different sets of problems. We have bigger problems with spam and, shitcoin airdrop spam and a bunch of other stuff like that, and abusive behavior on Nostr, but we also can build so many kinds of apps on Nostr. Like Nostr is a platform that is so much more open, whereas Blue Sky can't turn on federation and they can't turn on the openness because their community is freaked out about it and they want a better Twitter. And so by structures of how we've worked, we have very different sets of problems. You know, the Nostr community needs to figure out how to make a safer space and how to let people have safer spaces. Not to say that you can't have your speech, just like I can choose what community I'm participating in. Whereas the Blue Sky community and the Blue Sky creators need to figure out how to make their space more open and sort of take down some of those sort of walls that kept it safe, and replace it with things that people can run themselves.
Yeah, and I tell people just in common language. Well, what you said was in very common language, but also saying like Nostr is a bit of the Wild West approach, and then Blue Sky, from what I can tell, started with that moderation first, right? People wanted to replicate and replace Twitter with the speech they wanted. At least that's the way the community has come off.
Yeah,
and I think some people have had worse experiences than me,
but developers.
Yes, yeah, we hear that a lot, for sure, and I think that's clear to see. Ben, with you, I know you're building a lot, obviously in Bitcoin Lightning, but also in Nostr. I know you were talking about the marketplace, which we can get into if you want. But in terms of what Rabble said about that, holding those things in tension, you on the Nostr side of things, what's kind of the benefit of this openness, and what are some of the different types of things being built on Nostr? And I've started to use the language of like Nostr social, rather than, because I want people to understand too, like Nostr isn't just social media. And some have argued, I don't know if Ben, you have argued this, but some have argued social will be just one little piece and probably one of the smaller things that Nostr will eventually do as really a communication protocol, in large part. So it's not just like, oh, Nostr is Twitter. No, this is just one of the lowest hanging fruit, in my opinion, with it. But what are some of the things being built on Nostr and talked about?
Yeah, I mean, you're very right that the social side might not be the killer app or whatever, but might not mean the most used function or the most used thing, which is built on top of Nostr. I think having like peer-to-peer commerce without a trusted third party in the middle is pretty powerful. And there's some people who think that might be the killer app, but then there might be maybe it's Uber, maybe it's I don't know. There's a whole bunch of different use cases you could use for Nostr, but I think it's that when you give someone autonomy. And it's like the way I think of Nostr, it's like you have a cityscape and there's certain parts of the city which you're going to go to and it's safe and you won't get in trouble. And there's other parts of the city which you shouldn't go to and some very dark and scary streets which you probably should try and avoid. And when you give people the autonomy just to move freely within that cityscape, then they could find themselves in places they don't really want to be. So that's there for people who may look for it, but it should be made... It should be made very aware of where they're going and their journey and the sorts of streets which they might in fact find themselves going down. But I want a very vanilla Twitter experience. I don't want to see anything horrible. And I think the relay system is very powerful for that. I could just subscribe to some relays and they'll have moderation policies. But I think the point is that you don't know when you have like a walled garden. Some of these walled gardens, like Twitter. You don't know what their moderation policies, you don't know what their algorithms are, and that's troublesome. So, like, I have noticed, and I'm not being conspiratorial here, I've done a little bit of research with it, that if you just write the word Nostr in a tweet, like that tweet really doesn't get much traction. Whereas if I split up the word Nostr into separate characters, then it seems to do a lot better. So maybe that is a key word. Did you say that on Peter's podcast, by the way, Ben? You might have, yeah. So since then, because I posted a couple of things that I've really personally, it's still there. I put it on private, but before that, I was still posting to my personal Twitter. We have a pod Twitter as well, and I would post mainly just Nostr articles. Like I wrote a Nostr article for Bitcoin Mag. I've been trying to tell people about Nostr, just completely fed up with Elon and this kind of system. And I started splitting up the word, and I saw double the engagement. I mean, it's still relatively small and much smaller since Elon took over. But you're 100% right about that. It's not conspiratorial. Yeah, but you just don't know. Like you don't know what their moderation algorithms are, and when you have these relays, which can be a little bit more open, And if they're moderating in a way, if it, for example, I was posting on Nostr and I found that they weren't getting enough engagement, I was thinking, well, the relays I'm connected to are maybe filtering out some of these keywords, then I can just choose not to use those relays. I can just be like, okay, these relays aren't good enough for me. I need something a little bit more open. And on that as well, I think there's a lot of room for people being able to actively select what kind of algorithm they want to have access to.
We need agency over these things.
Yeah, definitely. So it's when you give people autonomy, you then need to give them the tools to be autonomous in a responsible and safe way. And that's the thing which Nostr just needs to build out. But again, it's perfectly plausible we can build those things out. And maybe there's I'm using a Nostr client, and I find that a lot of the maybe I'm an activist, and I find there's too many Bitcoiners on there, and I think, I don't like this algorithm, and then I switch to Rabble's algorithm, and Rabble's algorithm will just do degrees of separation between people who I follow and then their friends, and then I find that the content is more suitable to me. So I think it opens up a whole new space of people being able to engage with these vehicles which are navigating them through these streets, and being able to actively choose where they want to go with these vehicles. And that also depends on the client they're using. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of work to be done on relays. We certainly want to spin up some relays which are really safe and vanilla, and something I can let my kids use, for example. But then, how do you do that? Like, how do you moderate if you're running something for free? Like, how do you then moderate? How do you have the capital to moderate, or do you create a community of people who can moderate posts, and some power users can perhaps block certain public keys? But then what if they collude and they block public keys for political parties which they don't like, and then the users might like? So I think it's a really interesting field of research and development which needs to happen.
I think that it's fine that they collude and block political parties they don't like and political views they don't like. I think that.
Well, that's true. It could be a community based on a specific relay.
Yeah. So some of the things that we've been building leading up to Nostrasia is we've been working with causes.com. And causes.com originally started out as a progressive Facebook group. And it went through various iterations and stuff like that. And now we're bringing causes to Nostr. And so each organization or cause, say, environment, is going to have its own relay. And you can go to causes and request and set up your own relay. And we're building a viewer of Nostr that's relay centric. So I could say, I'm one of the pilots I'm launching is on protest.net. Protest.net is an activist calendar I started 25 years ago. And I'm, hacking together with the inmytown.social, that the sort of meetup type Nostr app. And we're going to run it at protest.net as an activist calendar that uses Nostr. And it's going to run its own relay. And its content that's on there is only going to be events and discussions about events of people who are relevant to those topics. And, I think that the long-term moderation solution is going to be the ability to plug in both AI to do detection and people. Because, one of the things that's fascinating is Meta, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, those all have problems scaling because they're trying to scale vertically. They're trying to handle the scale of a single organization handling hundreds of millions of posts a day. But if we scale horizontally in communities are actually what we as people know how to handle. Like, we know how to negotiate issues between different people. And so if we have, a few moderators per 100 people, then those moderators can understand the community they're moderating and be accountable to them. If they're not accountable to them, we have the ability to easily fork these communities. And that's super powerful. It's kind of like GitHub took down the power of the sort of benevolent dictator for life, because you can easily fork a project and software and keep it going. And as long as we can fork communities, then we can hold those moderators accountable. On Reddit, you can't hold the moderators accountable. Either Reddit, the company, can take away the mod powers, or the moderators could just go rogue, and members of the community don't have any way to say, this is the same thing. Here's the same members, but we've got a new set of moderators who are going to be more accountable to what we're doing. And that, the ability to walk away and not lose everything is a tremendous political power that holds people accountable.
What we're talking about here is freedom of association, freedom of movement, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Which I think is the power of Nostr.
Yeah,
and that's the thing which we need in society, to have free and people who are liberated and free.
Yeah, and I think it would be really cool if someone just showed up to a Nostr client, showed up to, I'll use Damus for example, leading iOS client, showed up, and then, okay, you start, it's like, welcome, here's your, create your NPub, whatever. Just, I've also advocated saying we need a step-by-step guide. I also mentioned like Duolingo, I think is a great app that has such a great step-by-step guide of like a cute and fun way. It's like, let's do that with like an ostrich or whatever for Nostr. And then you say, what are your likes and interests? Like, what do you want to use this social client for? You click a couple of things, it automatically, puts a couple of those relays. Let's say just hypothetically into that. And then it says, okay, here's how you add and, change different relays. Here's some suggested relays. And then also, let's say there's a premium option of this exclusive relay that has content from you, Rabble, and someone else, and someone really wants to, we need to find ways to fund and pay for these things too, because right now, the approach to development in my mind for Nostr is just like, okay, a lot of devs are doing this for free. Sometimes people will get little grants here and there. Jack Dorsey funds something out of nowhere, but we need more ways to actually build, and this was controversial for some people, build like companies that utilize Nostr, but utilize these free and open protocols in the way we're describing. We need to legitimize this for people. And I think some people are so sucked into their own rabbit hole. When I'm trying to talk to people through this podcast or just people in everyday life about what Nostr is, I sometimes have to take a step back and realize how lost they get very quickly into the conversation of what Nostr is. They're like, wait, what relays? I have to sign it. Like, what? Hold on, what are you talking about? Like, I just want to use a social app.
It's fine to admit that, within a commons that companies can operate. But partly the toxicity which you see in Bitcoin was a defense mechanism from when miners and big corporations tried to take control of the protocol a while back in 2017.
Blockchain Wars, people read that book.
Yeah,
give you a good idea.
It didn't exist. It didn't exist so much then, and it's kind of a sad hang up from that period. But it's funny because you had all these ANCAP Bitcoiners who were fighting big corporations and corporate interest, and it trying to take control of the commons. Essentially, is what it's trying to do. And I think that people just inherently understand that, yes, use this thing as much as you want to, to each their own ability, to each their own need, build whatever you want to do, make use of the software, make use of the ecosystem. But if you try and co-opt it, and if you try and take control, then as long as you have enough freedom of movement association, then people can just move their things to somewhere else. But it will be actively kind of, attacked, I suppose, by the natural immune system of the ecosystem.
Yeah,
which is the ability for people to easily move between things. And that's really where Nostr is powerful, is censorship resistance, empowering users through just the resilience in the infrastructure, being able to easily spin up relays, and clients as well, to switch clients and still have all your data. It's remarkable.
The way in which you can use multiple clients at the same time with the same social data, and each client maybe giving a very different perspective or providing very different functionality, but having it all work together is one of the superpowers of Nostr and one of the reasons why it's so exciting. But the initial user doesn't really get that. And our initial user experience makes sense that Bitcoiners or other folks who understand crypto got involved in Nostr, because the user identities and the way it works make sense if you're used to browser extensions and keys and wallets. If you're used to my user, it's not my identity or my keys, it's my account on this server, which is sort of both the centralized platforms, but also how, the Fediverse works. The server controls everything. If you're in that setup, then we're trying to teach a lot to people. Like, we're trying to teach them a lot, and users need, like, when you're adopting a new app, it needs to do one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like people have the intellectual, like, cognitive load to understand one new thing. And so we're trying to do several new things. And so I think that that's amazing. It's part of why it's exciting, but also we need to realize that the several new things is one of the reasons we're losing new adopters, and one of the reasons people are like, oh, Blue Sky under the hood has keys. They're just hidden behind like an NSEC style bunker username password that unlocks it. And, then users don't have to be told, this is what a wallet is, this is what a key is, this is what a browser extension is. They just gave you bundled a key management, cloud hosted key management solution with their social network. And honestly, that's a lot of why people are able to join it faster and more easily.
Mm-hmm.
I think with public key crypto is kind of like an inevitable step forward for humanity, people being able to wrap their heads around a private key and a public key. And I think that, Nostr is just, that's really the revolution, is public key crypto, because it allows things like Bitcoin, allows things like Nostr to exist. But I absolutely agree that there should be kind of a journey to autonomy where the initial experience, the user experience for some of these clients would be traditional legacy login system with the NSEC stored somewhere in some bunker. But it would then, give you the option, if you want to take full control of your keys, and maybe using some delegated keys or something. But there could be something of a journey there. But I do think that eventually, passwords are going to get so hard and captures are going to get so hard that people are just going to have to get used to using public key crypto. And it's one of those things which, like, you've been in technology for a long time, Rabble. Actually, Twitter had some, technically confusing things for people when they first engaged with it, such as hashtags and ats and whatever else. But eventually they get used to it,
Somebody mentioned to me the other day, this isn't super technical, but I was like, oh yeah, like when I first started using Twitter, there was the text to tweet options and different things like that. That's not technical, but it's just so funny to think about. And that's the tip of the iceberg.
So disorientating, isn't it? Yeah. Engaging that new technology.
It had all these IRC like commands. So you could start tweets with like, D space, and then all sorts of people would forget that it was D and not DM. And so in the early days, people kept tweeting DMs because they would be sending DMs from their SMS on their phone, and they would write DM and then the person's name and then what the message was. And Twitter for a while wasn't catching that people were doing DM instead of the command, which should have been just D space. So there were all these leaked DMs in the early days of Twitter because it had this super nerdy thing, like at username stuff, hashtags, retweets started just with writing RT. Like, it had all these like codes, and we were actually really good at learning codes, and is part of what made it a fun game. But eventually Twitter took the behavior and made it much easier to understand, so people aren't accidentally messing up their commands.
How do we, one question I think about a lot, and Mike Brock and I talked about this recently, him focusing on TBD and decentralized stuff. How do we get, because there's some decisions. So a lot of people in the Bitcoin community, when they hear like Elon's going to ask for more verification, all of these things, government's going to ask for more verification, this and that, millions and millions of people, let's say in the United States at least, and around the world, are going to do this without thinking twice. They're gonna go along with it. A lot of people are being born into it. Like I am 30, and I remember when these things. So I'm old enough and young enough to know, oh, this is kind of weird, right? I was kind of born in a cool time of the internet, I think, but just can understand a lot of people being born later on after that. Just this is a part of everyday life. It's not even thought twice. They don't buy into the dystopian narrative or buy into like, oh, opt out, use Bitcoin, or opt out, use Nostr, these things. How do we engage with that community, right? Because I think there's also different selling. People are trying to sell Nostr for content creation, for decentralized, for censorship resistant. I think there's many different ways to sell it. But how do you both think about that? Let's say specifically in this kind of decentralized social age, when a lot of people are just, okay, yeah, Elon's verifying more. Okay, yeah, we're going to do that. Well, Facebook's doing it forever. I have Face ID on my iPhone. It's like what else?
It's trying to solve that problem, which public key crypto solves beautifully and quite simply as well. Is just verifying their person is who they say they are and they're not. The account hasn't been hacked. But then there is public key having to manage your own keys, which is troublesome. But I just think more and more as time wears on, and we've seen it over the past few years, that people appreciate that these big international spaces, public spaces like Twitter and these social networks, which are corporate controlled and operate within the region which has certain laws or whatever. I think more and more they're discovering that walled garden is just a prison, and then they just want to escape. And some people escape, and then when they escape to another platform, they take a bunch of users with them, and it's talked about in the media, and then people go check it out, and I think that drives a lot of traffic. I do think that the interoperability of all these clients with the data is a superpower, definitely, like Rabble said. And actually, one of the main gravities of traditional legacy social networks is that as first movers, they're able to gain all these users, which just created this immense gravity. And then you have new projects, new altruistic projects where they're trying to have some censorship resistance and some freedom of movement, freedom of association. And they're hard to onboard people onto because all their friends are using these big platforms. And actually the power of Nostr, I think it has, whatever emerges as a sort of free and open source, open alternative, a true commons, interplanetary commons, not interplanetary, international, maybe interplanetary one day. I think whatever emerges, it has to be interoperable because then it has that gravity of users, of user base. So you could just build a client and then you've got access to, however many hundreds of thousands of users currently. I mean, are we at 1 million yet users? I think we're at 500,000 active users a while back on Nostr. And perhaps it then gets to a point where something like Instagram or Twitter is like, if I incorporate Nostr, the Nostr protocol into our platform, we will get access to an extra 10 million users, 10 million active users. And it won't be a particularly hard thing to do. So we can seduce them into injecting that Trojan into their centralized systems.
Well, and I think that we're going to, both in the centralized systems and in the decentralized, we're going to see, increasing interoperability. One of the interesting parts about the Matrix protocol is it, for chat and messaging, is starting to become the open central hub for all these different messaging things. And so, if you want to bridge Slack to Telegram to IRC to WhatsApp, you can do it via Matrix. And, what Matrix is doing is for chat and chat rooms and messaging. But what we are going to also see is similar bridging in the sort of more elaborate social media stuff. And so that's why, Nostr is part of the Fediverse. Whether or not people, I see maps of the Fediverse and, Nostr is in there because people in the Fediverse can follow Nostr users and Nostr users can follow Fediverse users. And there is, the Blue Sky server right now doesn't have federation turned on, but there is a @protocol decentralized network running for testing. And the folks running that have built gateways and interoperability between Nostr and Blue Sky. The only reason that isn't turned on in a way that we're seeing is because it's to the Blue Sky testnet. And so I think, there's a network effect. And the reason the web won, the reason that, open source won, the reason that Linux won is that we're building on top of each other. And so, I think we need to address issues of spam and being able to set up boundaries and enforce them and everything else. But I think we're also potentially getting a world where you would be crazy not to use the open alternative, because just like no one would go and build their software on top of a closed source proprietary programming language. The concept is crazy to say, that there are proprietary closed source programming languages out there. Companies build them and then they try and license people to use them, but no one would trust that. We as developers know that we wouldn't trust that because they could, stop updating the language. We saw all these huge court fights over Java. And so what we need to do is say, no one would build a social app that doesn't take advantage of these open networks, because you don't have to build it all yourself, and because you can take advantage of the network effect. But we need it to be able to have many networks and many communities and many ways of doing things, and not just one community.
It goes back to Stallman with the free software movement, with the these developers are just sick of signing those NDAs for those big corporations, and it's science, it's computer science. They want to be able to share their code, they want to be able to share their projects without having this thing constantly trying to sue them. And what was the phrase? I can't remember the phrase. It was like when you've been mentally, I can't remember the phrase. But they would, even if a developer had worked for a company, they was not mentally tarnished or something like that. Anyway, they could be sued if they then built something after they'd worked for that company. So it all got a bit ridiculous and silly. But I think the point is, like, developers, they want a permissionless development environment where they don't have to ask anyone's permission. Like me, I can build, a Bitcoin ATM or a Bitcoin point of sale, and I don't have to ask anyone's permission. I just go and build the thing. It's fine. And similar with Nostr, I can just build a client. And then because it's interoperable, because you have this modular approach to protocol development, and we have these NIPs, like suddenly in Amethyst, when I open up my Nostr client Amethyst, I see that I've got these video streams. I've got zap.stream video streams in my client, and there's people talking about these videos, and it's like a functionality which I haven't seen in other in other social networks, but it's really cool. Like, I like going there every now and then. So it's having that permissionless development environment means you get all these minds just wanting to build stuff on top of it, and then if there's anything good, it rises to the top, and all these other projects can just easily incorporate those things. Marketplaces are a great one. Like, look at Facebook Market and how relevant it is, and a lot of people use Facebook Marketplaces. Something very powerful about mining a social graph with selling stuff. I think that marketplaces, you'll start to see more of them, kind of Nostr-based marketplaces, creeping into social clients, and it'll be more powerful than Facebook because it won't be interoperable between clients, but it's permissionless development, which is again one of Nostr's superpowers. Free and open source in general.
One of the things that I really notice when I talk about Nostr to non-Nostr communities, because I'm active still on Twitter and on Mastodon, Fediverse, and on Blue Sky and Threads and everything, is there's a lot of envy over how many things are being developed and all the cool stuff happening in Nostr. The Fiat Job just proposed a subjective federated wiki where it used, CRDTs, and it was subjective. So the edit of the page is based on who I know. And, the events apps and all these other things in the marketplaces. And there's like so many of them, and there's so much going on in Nostr, more than other places and other platforms. So there's a lot of excitement about that, and there's a lot of interest there, but we haven't built the tool that works for multiple communities. And so people want to use what we're building, but the politics of some of the early users are scaring people away. And so we need that, I love what Amethyst and Satellite Earth and Coracle are starting to do with communities. That's really cool. I love the stuff with community managed relays. I think we need to do a lot more with lists so that I can say, this is my list of here's my list of all these people I'm interested in, or here's my mute list. I'm just going to subscribe to the mute lists of these 10 people because I trust them. And that's not censorship. That's choosing who you invite in your house. I'm not saying what you're going to, you can, in your own house or your own venue or in your own street corner, say whatever you want. That's free speech. But autonomy also means you get to decide what you put on your device and put in, engage in your communities. And, it's not a violation of First Amendment rights or free speech rights to kick the drunk person out of your house because they're being abusive at the house party, or just because you don't like them. And so we need the ability for people using lists using relays, communities, other things like that, to make it really easy to find all of these spaces and communities, because we've built a lot of the underlying apps. Like we've rebuilt a ton of the social stack. But we haven't made it easy for people to join yet.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast, and I'm really excited about this new partnership. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now. I think we still need early users that are willing to tolerate what you describe, like such as myself. Like when I came into Bitcoin, well, I was excited about it for a number of different reasons, and I started reading some stuff, and I'm like, oh, I don't align with this person politically or this book or this whatever. But I pushed through that because I'm like, this is revolutionary technology protocol, and I didn't have a tech background. I have like a humanities background, so I saw that. Same thing with Nostr, right? So I am able to see past that whole like, okay, I don't agree with them, so what? Like personally, but there are many people today, God knows into the future as well, that is such a hindrance. So I think we still need early users that are willing to push through that, whatever that is, and say, okay, I'm going to use this protocol in a different way, or use it oriented at my community and be loud about that. Be loud about it to people on Twitter, on the places where they typically on Blue Sky, whatever, and use it for those reasons. I think we still are in that era, and people are reading. I'm not sure when the initial code been with yourself or even Fiat Jeff, like late 2019 for Nostr. When did kind of some of this early code? It's still so incredibly new, obviously. So I think
I think I made my Nostr Twitter client, and it was like, it was late 2019. But I feel like it had been around a while, like Nostr had been around a while, because we had some really goofy, very developer-centric clients, which were very ugly. That's why I went and cloned Twitter, because I just thought, this is what normal people want. They want it to look nice.
Yeah,
the client which they're using.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's immense, the amount of development which has happened so quickly, and I imagine a lot of it's got to do with AI as well. Like it's a lot builder to build clients, a lot easier to build clients now than it was before. And I think that with those Bitcoiner types and within people within the free and open source movement, I think it's my software, my rules. And we're used to that. We're used to having control over the stuff we run, and we want control over the stuff we run. And I do think that normal people, over time, we're just starting to figure out and understand some of these concepts. It's just a matter of time until everyone starts drifting into a free and open source application stacks. But yeah, it's really phenomenal, the amount of things which are being built.
There was
Rabble,
a time in which it didn't seem like anyone was used, free and open source software. And now the truth of the matter is that a huge percentage of people's daily lives, especially, whether it's Android or the web browsers or the entire stack, we have proprietary code, but actually most of what we're using every day, most of what everyone is using every day is open source, is free software. And I think that people do care about it. They just, it has to be easy, and making it easy is hard. And so we're not making it for everyone yet, but we need to walk in that direction.
Yeah, it's
the classic free and open source is the ugly UI of like GIMP or something over Photoshop or LibreOffice, and you're like, can I have a ribbon on LibreOffice, please? And all these open source developers are like, no, we'll never have a ribbon. You're like, people like a ribbon. Just give us an easy UI to work with, please. WordPress, like we are just always, all of us are using free and open source. And this is why these big proprietary companies, which initially tried to fight free and open source like Microsoft, are now big free and open source contributors, because they have to be. And probably similar in closed systems when it comes to social networks as well, it's not going to be a choice. Like, they're going to have to engage with them and incorporate them into their business models. And there's still money to be made. It's just, don't try and co-opt the whole protocol. Don't try and co-opt the whole ecosystem. Like Twitter could be a very successful company on Nostr,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or on Blue Sky, you know, because there's still plenty of room for it to make money. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Still got a big user base.
And you know, I think that, you know, one of the things that I think about when I think about Bitcoin, especially when I think about the idea of like progressive Bitcoin, is, you know, the idea of an autonomous financial system and an autonomous currency dates back so that the current credit unions and mutual aid societies, credit unions that exist, and there are credit unions that are very large, and the current like agricultural co-ops, there's huge numbers of agricultural co-ops. Both of those date from anarchist unions in the 1840s who said we need to set up our own financial system that's autonomous from the government and autonomous from capital. And they built it there, and they built all these things that weren't directly trying to replace the state. They were saying, we're going to come together and we're going to build our own institutions. We're going to make our own banks, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not too different than what a bunch of people are trying to do today. You know, then it was with, you know, physical credit unions that had safes that held money and then lent it out. But today, the attempt of making an autonomous financial system that could be community controlled is, you know, it's, boy, we're also seeing very messy stuff with, you know, every scam in capitalism, but we're seeing the potential for a reviving of an alternative of a community controlled progressive financial system that has been experimented with for almost 200 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's these underlying currents. So for me, I came into this space such a like sociology background, political theory background. That's the way I approach a lot of this, and that's being pulled and in tension with the cypherpunk movement and studying more of that. So I still lean towards, and sometimes I enjoy having conversations like this because I hear from open source developers, and there's this, I think, inherent optimism that I would say you both carry. I think there's a bit of like, oh, we need this to be open source and open and free. So there's a bit of anger and frustration, right? When you see different forces trying to fight against that. But inherently in open source development, I see just such optimism. Already the things that have been won and winning out, and why it feels like a lot of these things are inevitable because of how great they work, how focused they are. But for me, I'm constantly looking at the political landscape and the world stage as well, with a lot of battles, whether it's encrypted messaging and all of these different things. And I think there's an underlying current within global populations and things of just people feeling unsettled, whether, I mean, we talk about this with Bitcoin a lot, like constantly ravaging inflation and people getting very frustrated in their daily lives. So they're looking to put that on other things, right? And the government's then utilizing that in a way to say, this is the source of your problems, right? This is why this technology is dangerous. This is why. And so people are projecting that onto other things. That is still my fear with, to be transparent, with things like Nostr or with things like private encrypted communication, and the CEO of Signal has been doing great stuff, just kind of putting out messaging for normal people. Even, I don't want to toot his horn, I'm not sure how you all feel about this, but even I see ads all the time for like WhatsApp, and I know there's a lot of technical challenges there and privacy concerns, yes, but even the message to mainstream audiences on like TV commercials that say your messaging should be private, just for people to think about this, and then they see, oh, there's better methods for that than WhatsApp. But just that is new. Like I didn't grow up with that.
I think it's great. Normal people. Yeah, normal people, they finally appreciate those things. I remember when BlackBerry, they started doing the end-to-end encrypted messages, and there's a big uproar from people saying, just drug dealers are just going to use it, blah, blah, blah. But more normal people, they do want privacy, and they do understand that some of these technology stacks, there are, there is someone listening in on your conversation, and then also in on your, but it's just about decentralized. You just want decentralized control for pretty much most things, and then you erode the power of big state, and you erode the power of big corporations, and of course, they're going to fight it. It's just like how they fought the free and open source software movement. It's just like how they fought a general encryption on the internet, because it erodes their power base, and it's they want to have the most amount of control as they can possibly have, whether it's countries or corporations, whatever, and they're going to fight it. But I think a Bitcoin is by far, it's kind of almost too big to fight now. They should have made it more of a concerted effort to destroy it early on. But this is it's a holy grail of many streams of economics when it comes to Bitcoin. You have, Hayek with the idea of private banks and them printing their own currencies, which people could choose to use or choose to not use within free markets. And then you have Keynes with his concept of the Bancor, which is what he proposed in Bretton Woods, which is an apolitical value transfer rather than using the US dollar. So you don't have a country who's got the world reserve currency. And then you had Marx with he believed that good money was something like gold, which was apolitical and wasn't within the control of countries. But I do think we do now have like soft currency, and soft currency is very useful for, if you have like economic downturn, you need to be able to like create more currency to get out of that downturn. But then obviously that's done in a centralized way, and people get carried away with it, and you end up with high inflation and inflation problems. But ultimately what I'm trying to say is that decentralizing control and having like just building apolitical money is very powerful, and like it's the holy grail for pretty much every strand of economics. And yeah,
do you think
we'll win?
Do you think, Ben and Rabble, that and again, we hear this so much in the Bitcoin space and others, like I'm not a doom and gloom, okay, the government's going to close in and just, whatever tomorrow, right? And I try to keep this optimistic and have realistic conversations as well. Like I kind of talk about, I think the US dollar will still be around in my lifetime. Like, these different types of conversations. I don't think it collapses imminent.
Yeah. It'll be exactly like free software. It'll be like these big proprietary software companies will fight free software, then eventually they'll realize they've got to use it. Countries will fight the use of some free and open source money. But then eventually they'll realize that they have to incorporate it and use it. And I think you'll still always have a US dollar, but it'll be kept in check by the fact that people, and I think it is being somewhat kept in, maybe not kept in check, but there is this other alternative now, which if the banks take too much of the piss, then you can just move your value out into it and take out of the banking system. So it's I think John Nash wrote about that with the ideal money thing. It was often having that alternative there.
Often the old system doesn't go away. Europe used to be governed by the church, and then monarchies took control and wrested power from the church. And then, a bunch of people, including a bunch of business people, ended up setting up parliaments and wrested power from the monarchies. And now in Western Europe, you have parliamentary democracies, and then there's people fighting, for alternatives, and there's international stuff, and there's stuff that's autonomous and not based on sort of existing within the sovereign state. But the church is still there. The monarchy is still there. Like the parliament is still there. And so the old systems and the old institutions, some of them, once they get baked into society, never go away, but they lose their power. The church is not choosing who to execute. The church is not defining the laws anymore, and the monarchy is not saying you have an exclusive patent to, run printing presses. And so, and now with the way in which the internet has come along, the state is struggling with the idea that they can control everything that goes on within their borders. Because, with, my company, we have people in Poland and Spain and Uruguay and the US and New Zealand, and, one person who is in a different country every week. And, the state doesn't go away, but it struggles with how to handle the new system that we've created. And that's really powerful. And so we're not going to see the old economic institutions, the old political institutions, cultural institutions disappear. They're just going to lose their dominant power that they had as we develop other alternatives. And, Friendster still exists, even though it's no longer important. So does MySpace. So, we need to...
Is there still a MySpace.com?
There is still a MySpace.com,
I don't think I've actually typed that in so long. Okay.
I'll
put that in the show notes, MySpace.com.
Yeah.
people to check out. It's
But
great.
my point is, like, we don't need to make them go away to shift the center of power to something new. And so, but we do need to make, we need real concrete incentives. Why do I want to use this? That are, people say they believe in privacy. And so given two equivalent options, they will choose the more private one. People say they believe in autonomy and transparency and choice and all these things. And given two equal alternatives with being able to talk to the same friends and get the same thing in both places, they will choose the better one. But if we, one has the funny cat videos and the other one doesn't, they're going to go the one that has the funny cat videos.
Yeah, that was gonna be my one pushback was, and a choice between privacy and ease. Right now, they're still choosing ease. So that's why I said, that's why a little while ago, earlier on, I was like, okay, if someone doesn't want to use Nostr, for instance, or some client because of some decentralized point, they might want to use it because they can monetize off of their content, or they like some of their friends are on it and they're talking about it, or they like the app. They're like, oh, this app is cool and Twitter keeps crashing, or Twitter Spaces sucks, so I'm going to use Nostr nests or something. Like, I think there's a different pull for everyone. And I don't want to extend the metaphors to Bitcoin too much, but it's a similar way to Bitcoin. I think there's so many different ways you could talk to someone about why Bitcoin is important, regardless of their politics, regardless of their gender identity, where they live. I think it's got something for everyone. Same thing with Nostr.
I'm not sure it's so user driven either. Like the adoption of more free and open source private ways of doing things, like WhatsApp, for example. I'm sure they weren't lobbied by their users. Like, we must have privacy.
Yeah,
it was just like something they could do, and it's good for marketing, and it shows that they're a more progressive app than some other chatting apps, and this gives them kind of a bit of a USP when they're in the market. But yeah, no, there's a the anarchist mantra of the better world is possible. Like, we erode power over time. You go from slavery to feudalism to capitalism, and then something else. What comes next? Whatever comes next. And I think the tooling is the important part. Like with widespread democracy, that was made possible by the printing press. And if you have the right tooling, it makes different ways of doing things more. Like, cooperatives are really hard to run, right?
Yep.
But then, if you have the ability to easily split payments through an organization, and then each of the people in the organization instantly get the payments into their wallets when something's bought within, which the cooperative is selling, then people will then vote to maybe have more percentage go to marketing and more percentage go to distribution, depending on, so people become more engaged with the production process. But it's all on the right tooling, and having micropayments is a new tool which we can use to build these things, and having free open source social network clients which have permissionless development anyone can build, and I think is a new tool. I live in kind of like a fairly anarchist community, and for years we would have these monthly meetings to manage our common spaces, like the track. It's got potholes, it needs the potholes to be filled, and the paths need to be done, and there's some bushes which needs to be cut. And over the month, if someone would, they'd have an idea, I'm going to fix the track, I'm going to put this new material down, blah, blah, blah. And they tell someone else, and then there'd be like Chinese whispers, and then there'd be gossiping, and there'd be all this tension which was built up. And then you'd finally have this meeting of people, and there would just be all these arguments, and people would be pissed off with each other. Now, we just have a WhatsApp group, and it's WhatsApp, whatever. But like, people are constantly in communication with each other. And it's just having that new tooling now means that our little community works really well. Like, everything runs smoothly. We have these meetings, and no one argues with each other, and it's incredible. Like the difference. And it's just having access to like a shared messaging app. That's it. So with the right tooling, like, what can we build? Like, can we build different forms of production? Can we build more efficient and cooperatives which are much easier to run? I think we probably can.
Yeah, it's instrumentalism too. It's using these things in specific use cases to address problems, right? And to your point, I don't know if it was the case for WhatsApp, but obviously with Bitcoin, it was the case. It was, a group collective kind of formed over many years, and Satoshi, whoever them individual group was. It also takes every now and again someone doing quote unquote the right thing. I know it's hard to define what the right thing is, but every now and again it takes those charismatic leaders throughout history to also do that. Those selfless acts of, I'm going to create this free and open protocol. then I'm going to step away, or I'm going to be a person working on this team. So it is a very cool thing where it's not that someone has control or that this only exists because of that one person, but every now and again, it's these little blips of people doing the right thing, or people going in opposition to what the ruling party was, or the state and the church, and things that Rabble was talking about.
People want to have positive impact on the society they live in, don't they, or the world or whatever. If you can build like an apolitical money system which everyone can have access to, then that's a good way to have quite a lot of impact. So, and like with VHF, with Nostr, it's a good place for him to position himself to have the maximum impact and try and make the world a bit of a better place, is just by building this protocol, which is easy to work with. But yeah, I think most people are quite nice, and most people want to help each other, and most people want to try and build a better world. But we're often, we're bound by the society in which we live in, aren't we? So something which I'm aware of in our little community is that because we're constantly communicating with each other, and because we don't have like set boundaries, for example, when it comes to land. So often there's a lot of you have to talk to people, and you have to make compromises. And they're things which are kind of taken away from human interaction when you just live in a city which is managed by a council or whatever. But I think by eroding some of that decision making and some of those conversations and getting rid of the use for them, like you end up with an easier society to manage, but then from the top, from a centralized point. But I think we kind of lose that bond between each other, and we don't have such a great relationship with our neighbors. And Rabble, I heard you talking on a video, and you were talking about how in protest movements, there's something very kind of like cathartic, and there's a sense of community, and everyone comes together, and it's sort of almost like the thing you had in the Spanish Revolution, where people were suffering and it was a hard life, but they had that connection, which meant that it was something glorious and wonderful.
We're doing it together.
At the risk of being painfully topical, that was what we experienced at Burning Man when it rained. Like, there were a few people who were like, "Oh my God, it's raining! I can't drive my art car around," or, the toilets are going to overflow. The toilets didn't actually overflow. People but so there were a few people who were like, "Oh no, crisis means society collapse. I'm going to walk 5 miles in the mud to escape this terrible thing."
Which is funny that someone at Burning Man would say that, out of all places.
I know.
Right? That they're the irony.
99% of the people were like, "Awesome. This is just a different thing. And now instead of wandering across this, 3 square mile city, I'm going to go see what the people next door are doing and make sure they're okay." And so the event actually became better because it had this adversity that brought people to connection. And so, that's similar to what happens in a protest, or that's similar to what happens when people react after a natural disaster. Your normal rules of social interaction break down because you're going through something difficult. And instead of our sort of apocalyptical ideas that we get from Hollywood of, a disaster brings out the most selfish in people, the evidence is that people who go through hard collective times like that actually start relating to other people around them in a more humane way. And so, the thing with Burning Man is that all of a sudden everyone was sharing everything, and people were checking in on each other and making jokes around it. And it wasn't the same event. It wasn't the same experience because of that hardship, because you had then a common bond and a common way of reconnecting that wasn't the way in which people had connected before. And so I think that people are so excited about social software online and social media because you can connect, because you can feel part of it. The original thing that happened as Twitter started growing in the very early days is all of a sudden it felt like you could be inside the zeitgeist human brain. You could, instead of just me seeing this sort of the world at a distance, all of a sudden you could feel part of it. And you would say things that were also synapses firing in the brain. And so, what we're doing with Nostr is saying, we don't have to have it just be about these tweets, but we can exist in this collective brain in so many ways, in so many kinds of apps, and that's super exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, would you say that was one of your favorite Burning Man experiences then this year with the rain?
Absolutely. And in fact, I was telling people before it rained, like when we had the forecast that was going to rain, I'm like, I really hope it really pours.
Nice. I actually kind of feel like it's not. It's almost it's restoring more of a natural state of humans collectively being in a shared space, because you would have to work together with your tribe or your local community or whatever. And I kind of feel that, like, it's the divide and conquer thing, isn't it? That there's certainly incentive and forces pushing people apart from each other, whether it's corporate interest and in the plight of the individual, or whether it's whether it's a state trying to kind of erode those bonds between each other so they don't protest. But do you think it's maybe less that it's pushing people into into where they have to cooperate with each other, and it's maybe more that it's eroding that stuff which keeps us apart in our everyday lives, and restoring something which is very, very human and very natural.
I think so. I think that I think we're seeing all this conflict because all of a sudden we can hear each other and we can be more connected. And the tension existed before, you just couldn't see it or hear it. There was this idea when there was a few, with the advent of the radio and then the advent of television and national television broadcasts, all of a sudden we had this idea that, everybody in a country is the same, which didn't exist before radio and television. And authoritarian governments only came to exist because of the radio. Like, you couldn't have authoritarian states in the way that we look at the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany or a bunch of others. You couldn't have that without radio being able to sort of unify you against the idea of the voice of a single leader. And so now, instead of being able to get a single voice out to a whole country, we get every voice out to a whole country, and it opens up potentially the opposite set of politics, where we're participating not once every 4 years to vote, but, every minute of every day. And that's super chaotic, but it's also, we're human and it's really special.
Yeah. Again, it's the right tooling, isn't it? Which allows, I mean, obviously we have a lot of us we live in political systems which were built and designed in a time when you didn't have like a mobile phone in your pocket the whole time. So yeah, absolutely. There's no reason we couldn't have more referendums and voting, daily or weekly voting. But that's a really interesting concept that before radio, you didn't have like the mass propaganda, which you're able to have through state television, isn't it? And I think people they got comfortable with it, didn't they? Like, they've been able to trust the journalists, been able to trust the BBC, and now they're thrown into this world where they have to really kind of dig deep, more and more as well, particularly with all the AI stuff, where they can't trust what they're seeing and hearing and as much as they could before. I know with some of the older generation, they fall into a lot of these conspiracy theories. I think a lot of people do fall into these conspiracy theories because they still have that old hang up where they can, if there's someone stood there and they look official and they're being streamed through video, then what they're saying must in fact be true.
The conspiracy theories aren't new, really. If you go down to the core of a lot of them, a lot of the conspiracy theories that, Hitler used to take power, or Mussolini or Franco or all these folks, they're actually kind of these sort of anti-Semitic tropes and stories and things like that. And in many ways, the core of a lot of the conspiracy theories we have today are actually the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And now, though, the way in which those theories spread and how they act is different, but it's not like conspiracy theories haven't been around for a long time. I mean, what do you think a witch trial is? Mm-hmm. Except like a collective hallucination and conspiracy theory that somehow the woman who is unmarried and going off and knows how to use herbs and like does medicine is like causing the weather to mess up or causing people to get sick. Like that's a conspiracy theory. And so, people have been prone to conspiracy theories as long as we've been people. We need.
I think with more access to data that people, because it seems to be a lot of people are falling for conspiracy theories, or maybe they've just got more access to conspiracy theories and what looks like legitimate data. But it seems like a lot more normal people now, they think some pretty wacky, far out stuff,
Yeah.
Whereas before, I suppose they were protected by journalism and journalist integrity.
We built up a set of institutions that protected society from a bunch of conspiracy theories. And it was a rough process. Like, the Second World War was a really rough process. But part of what we got out of it was a whole bunch of institutions and norms and ways of running society and the media and government to try and prevent people from being susceptible to the conspiracy theories that led to that conflict. The First World War started over all sorts of weird conspiracy theories about killing this Archduke of, I don't remember where he was, but in Sarajevo. Like, that was totally driven by conspiracy theories. So, we had tens of millions of people killed in wars that were driven by conspiracy theories. And then, the outcome of that, not just did we get, like, the Bretton Woods institutions, and we got the United Nations, and we got things like the BBC, but we also got the journalistic ethics of the New York Times saying, okay, this is or isn't real. And we got a bunch of people deciding that I'm going to believe this source and not this other one. And now, once we opened up the gates, opened up a kind of Pandora's box of everyone getting a voice and a platform, we need to teach people new ways of media literacy around it. And we need to build into our software new ways of amplifying the anti-conspiracist voices. And it's not, you don't debunk someone's conspiracy theory by saying you're wrong. In fact, a conspiracy theorist, someone who believes in it, getting evidence that their theory is wrong actually psychologically reinforces their belief in the incorrect theory. What changes us is not arguments of fact, but instead human connection to someone who can talk to you and reason with you and connect to you, who has a different point of view. And so, our solution to the problem of conspiracy theories isn't to return to the centralized, BBC, New York Times government deciding what is and isn't considered legitimate. Instead, it is building software where we have the ability to show and track and tag and document things about conspiracies. Wikipedia is a collectively edited project that does a really good job of weeding out conspiracy theories and like double checking the facts. And so we think of conspiracy theories of running rife over social media, but Wikipedia is social media, and it does a really good job of double checking that stuff through collaborative wikis and through editing rules and through communities of people who double check stuff. And so like Fiat Joff's new subjective federated wiki stuff, we could build shared documentation on things that isn't centered in one point of view, but does let us put brakes on things that were going viral and say, actually this is, wait a second, let's have a conversation about this.
What's this? I've not heard of this federated.
I mean, you see that he posted on it a few days ago. So, by the time the podcast will up, but basically, using CRDTs and collaborative documents. So you do an anchor of a document, which is like, this is the page. And then the version I see is the edits of all the people that I'm subscribed to in Nostr. And all the CRDTs, they do operate, transforms on it that edit the page. But your version is going to be different because you exist at a different spot in the network. You're subscribed to different people's content. And so we will see the same page, but we'll see the edits from our own perspective in the social network, which is amazing. So, we could have one page about Bitcoin or trans rights, and what one person sees and what someone else sees is based on their social circle.
So it's like community notes, like Twitter community notes, but tailored to who you follow, subscribe to, that kind of thing. You know, the community notes on Twitter.
Everybody can submit edits to the notes that do transformations on it, but each person's view of it is from their perspective in the network.
Yeah.
How do you find truth then? Because you're going to say that's the it's going to reinforce whatever opinion you have by your social group who all have the same weird opinion you have. You know.
Yep.
How do you find truth? How do you find? It's a good thing to have, as like you say, as like notes, community notes. But I'm trying to think, how would you then sift through?
A good example would be like, say you had a document and it was a scientific document or something. You know, it was something that's like really easy to pin down to fact. You could have people who do edits that represent, like, not every person doing edits is the same. You could have one person which is like, I'm a medical doctor and I'm editing the pages on viruses or on vaccines. And so you can have people who are saying, you know, yes, I want my social graph, but I want this person who is a medical doctor who does research on vaccines, I want their edits to apply to my page.
I guess it's the lesser of two evils, because you already have that, right? If you follow someone only follows specifically far left-leaning politicians or far right-leaning, they're already choosing their echo chamber anyway. So I guess it's the trade-off in this situation. I guess at not a lot of Nostr, but it's like the individual is curating content. Is that better than a centralized force curating content? Does that solve the problem of people's addiction to social media, addiction to misinformation? Not necessarily.
No, I don't know.
But we have to also teach people to think critically. Like, yeah, so these people we need to teach critical thinking. It's not really solvable in these equations, maybe.
But part of critical thinking is being able to sift through data and finding the right trying to sift through information and find the right information, isn't it? So I think this might make that easier, because you
I agree.
You'll pull in because the human mind, just by us being able to walk and talk and put code into computers, like, it's hungry for good data and it wants to learn stuff. But you can easily like bypass that by feeding it crap data, which sounds legitimate. So I wonder if this comes, because there's been somewhat in Bitcoin, there's been this big drive chain debate. There's a bunch of people in Bitcoin there's a proposal to build these side chains called drive chains, but they allow a lot of extra functionality on Bitcoin. And there's a very kind of like reactionary response from the Bitcoin community that they just hate it, and there's a very kind of binary good bad. This is a bad thing, where it's actually kind of a powerful tool set. There's a lot of good things about it. I wonder if that, because I know he's been struggling personally to try and communicate these complex ideas. I wonder if that's maybe a way, maybe it's like a tool for himself to be able to build up those, just construct those ideas in a way which is easier for him then to present to somebody else, I suppose. These shared wiki pages, it's really interesting.
And say, look at these comments from other technical folks in the Bitcoin community. Is that what you're saying? Kind of like people being able to comment on like different white papers of drive chain or different proposals.
He could ask this community to contribute to the documents, and they could collaboratively edit them and define whose edits are pulled in.
Yeah, and if you've got a debate like that, then you can say, okay, well, you're completely against it, okay, and this is from your social graph. This is this version of the document, right? Read it. Now read my version of the document from my graph of engineers and computer scientists and whatever else, and then compare and contrast which one sounds,
pass
more
it into a large language model to just tell me what the differences are.
That's what we need. AI, tell me the answer, please.
Yeah, gosh, this conversation went all over. This was great. Well, I want to pull on a couple of things, Rabble, too, that you were saying, and also one thing that I've gleaned a bit from several different books, but I think Lynn Alden, I don't want to put too many words in her mouth too, but articulates it well. Kind of a lot of times throughout history, it seems the rise of populism, for whatever degree, also can really happen when people's individual situations are pretty shitty, especially when it comes to money. So obviously in Germany, that was a huge reason for the rise of the Nazi revolution and this whole kind of cause. And again, I think in my college days, I used to be very, very reductionist with class situations and Marxism. It was very appealing. I think as I get older, I see a bit more nuance in things. And unfortunately, the world isn't as black and white as I think a lot of us would like it to be in terms of problems and solving them. So this podcast won't solve it, or these conversations, but
Turns
I will
out
say you
humanity is
see
complicated.
yeah, I know it sucks. It's very complicated. It's beautiful though. It's two sides of the same coin. So in terms of, folks not having their resources. So I think a lot of times what happens is you were talking about, and I think it was really beautiful, Ben and Rabble, what we were talking about in terms of like, okay, kind of a natural state is this people coming together and figuring things out. And then I'm also like, okay, when does that fade? At what point does that, because to use one example in the US, I think the sense we got, and it was kind of an older hierarchy of media structure as well. But what happened during 9/11, right? This horrible event in terms of, kind of shaped my childhood and coming after that. But also you saw portrayed, but also you kind of felt it individually. At least I remember for myself and my family and friends and everyone felt very American, right? Like shortly after this event, we're like, we got to come together. Life is so short. Look at all these this horrible thing that happened, and these folks that died, this tragic death, this terrorism. We all need to come together. People were kind of a bit more patriotic, a bit more taking care of themselves, a bit more looking at their neighbors.
And then it weaponizes.
Yes, so that's my point. Is at what point? And there's no. I'm wondering if there is a script or there's a point where they take catastrophe, and some folks will talk about COVID in this way as well. I wouldn't go as extreme with that. I think there's some similarities, but 9/11 was a very specific tragic thing, the worst crisis that's happened in the United States on our soil in terms of this terrorist attack, and then the way it was weaponized. And then you look at that, and since then the division has gone deeper and deeper, because then people's lives started to get a bit worse as well after the 2008 great financial crisis. And back to my point of saying people can't pinpoint why exactly, so they're taking it out on other forms. They're taking it out on this group and that group, and conspiracies abound. And the government, whether nefariously or just ignorantly, creates these policies, right? Like the Patriot Act and everything that's happened after that. And I think
it was sitting around for a long time. They were waiting to take it over. Naomi Klein has this book called The Shock Doctrine, which I highly recommend. It's a great book. And what she talks about is that how sometimes we end up in these moments of crises where there's a shock to the system, and people are able to push through things that they were trying to push through anyway. Like, there was a whole bunch of people who wanted to, through the Patriot Act, they wanted to get rid of a whole bunch of civil rights that we had, privacy of communication and political organizing. And so that was sitting there waiting for people's wave of real grief and community and connection that happened after 9/11. But then they took it and they used it to advocate for, because people are like, we must do something. But what they ended up advocating for wasn't addressing the issue. Because, we lost more people in the United States on many days of the COVID pandemic from COVID than died on 9/11. But it was spread out. It wasn't spectacular. A virus is hard to blame. It's not a good enemy. And so we didn't, we did mobilize. We mobilized tremendous amount of economic aid to people. And yes, it was super messy. And medical mobilizations and vaccine work and everything else. But it was harder than these are the people that are the enemy. And so, when we have lots of uncertainty, when things are changing a lot, people often want structure and order and someone to tell them it's going to be okay, and that they just need to solve this one thing. And so that's why people become more religious. They get into more sort of fundamentalist religions, and they fall in behind, populist leaders. And, we don't, there's this idea of accelerationism where we just need to make things worse and worse and worse. And then the current system will collapse, and then we will be able to replace it with a much better system. But the history of social change shows us that it's not fear that leads to better situations. It's hope. This is
Mhm.
Hannah Arendt stuff where she studied, on the rise of totalitarianism, which is like, how do you stop, Hitler or Stalin taking power, and or the current day stuff of like, what's going on in Turkey or Hungary or a bunch of other places. You stop that by giving people viable hope for an alternative.
Mhm.
And so what, what we need to
And
do
that's why
is
North
say,
Korea is so insular, and
yeah,
a
yeah,
place
because they
like
don't have
that
any
is
hope.
so devoid of hope. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
The Shock Doctrine was a great book because the Shock Doctrine itself is what they tried to do in the USSR, and then also in when they went into Afghanistan as well. No, sorry, Iraq as well. And it's the idea of being able to just turn a society upside down and have a revolution, and then everything's better. And you do within history, you have these revolutions like the French Revolution or something. But then what you have is this huge power vacuum, and then the thing you end up with is often worse than the thing you started with.
Mhm.
In the USSR, Mikhail Bakunin very correctly predicted that Marx's idea of this proletariat revolution would just create the Red Scare, and then it'll be far worse than the feudalism which came before. Which he was very correct on that. But it's all about like stability, like you say. Like humans, we like to pretend that humans are very resilient, but they're really not very resilient. And if you put them in stressful scenario situations, and they make weird decisions, and they become suspicious of each other and things. And like economically, like this is why I'm going to go back to Keynes again, which may annoy some Bitcoiners. It's very annoying with Bitcoiners how they're obsessed with Austrian. I mean, Austrian economics is great, yeah, absolutely, but read all the different
And
types
read
of
all different
economics, MMT.
Keynesian as
Read
well.
it
They
all.
think that Keynes is
Yeah,
a black and white figure.
Keynes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Keynes's whole point was that you have peaks and troughs in an economic cycle. You have a production, you have crashes, you have a Great Depression, and then when you have a Great Depression, everyone's really hungry, and that resentment can be weaponized against the Jews, or can be weaponized against whoever in order to get these populist leaders. We had it in the UK when we had after 2008. We had the Brexit vote, and the Brexit vote. It'll annoy people by me saying this, but there was like a racist element to it. Mm-hmm. And we were blaming these Syrian refugees. All our issues which we have in our country, it's not an internal issue. It's actually these poor Syrian refugees, who are walking across continents to come to our country because they feel it's a great, safe place to be. They're actually our problem. And then, so we then become more insular, and we separate away from the European Union. And like the European Union as a peace project, like we had 2 wars in close succession, the First and Second World War. And when you have all these countries quite close together, and then if they're all separated economically, they're not within the same trade zone, then maybe they're not using the same currency, then you'll start to find that it's just easy to blame, like, well, what are our problems? Okay, it's the French. The French are our problem. And then the Germans don't like the French either, okay? And it's like, okay, you sort these French people out and go to war with them. But the French are allies with the Italians, and then all of a sudden you have another world war. So it's instability, and you look at the wars, all the great catastrophes which have happened, and physical conflict, and there's usually economic war or depression or some economic downturn which happened quite recently before it. And people are aware of that, and that's why they need to keep the wheels of the economy moving. Why into 2008 the economy wasn't allowed to go into a Great Depression, was for that very reason, because we're trying to avoid like conflict. We don't want conflict, but we've still seen it. We've still seen the rise of these populist leaders, and why is my life circumstance not as good as it was, 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And it's not because, there's this big complicated problem. It's because of these people over here. And someone tells me that story, and then it's very appealing. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll vote for that person who told me that story. And they just double down on that, whatever conspiracy. And then you end up with people being oppressed. And so it's, stability. And going back to the revolution and things changing, and us talking about that slow revolution, about these things being infected with things like Nostr, things like Bitcoin, banks probably just ending up using something like Bitcoin. We don't want the world's economy to suddenly collapse and then it's replaced by Bitcoin, because that would be horrible, and it probably wouldn't last very long. And what we end up with would be not as good as what we had before. We want Bitcoin to just slowly infiltrate and just offer this alternative free and open source money, and apolitical value transfer, and we want a slow revolution. We don't want a sudden shock doctrine type revolution.
And we, there's some psychological factors in this, which is we notice behavioral economics that we care a lot more about things that are lost than things that are gained. Mm-hmm. So take something away from someone, and we feel that loss more than being given that same thing. And so, one of the tricks with this is, as society changes, as these things shift, as economy changes, we notice the things we lose more than the things we gain. And so that creates all these tricky dynamics that pushes people into, pursuing authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the best hopes for Nostr and Bitcoin. I think they're on different journeys, different life cycles. Nostr being so much newer. I think, me personally, I talked to a lot of people about this. I think Bitcoin is here and staying, and it just depends on level of adoption, speed, all of this. Nostr is still a question mark, I think, because of community stuff, because of how we can really integrate and get people to buy in and see this. But I think different iteration of decentralized social and web, yes, that will continue on. But I think the best hope we have, for Nostr and Bitcoin, and some of the best advocates are the ones saying, yeah, Bitcoin, if it's to be, new money, we don't want to see a collapse of something, like you said, overnight. That would be terrible for people, but kind of a slow, almost like a slow trolling as well, which I think, obviously there's so many different conversations about memes and the use of memes. And just, I think one of the best ways to advocate, to protest, to utilize something is build this better structure that works and have people slowly use it and be like, JP Morgan, we don't need you anymore. Like, screw off. Like our US government, okay, sure, you say you're going to do this, but we know it's just going to keep happening this way. We're going to go use our Bitcoin. We're going to go use, Bitcoin at merchants. We're going to hold it in Bitcoin, that kind of thing. Same thing with Nostr. It's like, okay, Elon, I'm sorry you bought this and are now severely in debt and need to make all this money. We're gonna use Nostr instead of Twitter. It's just not working. And that slow trolling, that slow, evolution into society is the way these things went out, specifically for Nostr and Bitcoin. I don't know about all social movements, but for that, I feel that especially with Bitcoin and Nostr.
This is why I like the architecture of Nostr, because you go from that, you have like dumb servers, smart clients, which then empowers users. And that's basically what we're trying to do to create freer people, is to take those centralized power structures and then wither them and dissolve them, make them superfluous. But by doing that, it then empowers people, because the power shifts downwards as opposed to being, top heavy, and then we end up with a more bottom heavy in our power structures. And Nostr just fundamentally in its architecture has that paradigm, as opposed to the old paradigm which we're used to, which was smart servers and dumb clients.
Yeah. Well, long story short, and we'll have to have another conversation on this. I feel like we could talk for hours about a bunch of this, the things we were talking about. But long story short, I think there's incredible hope in things like Nostr and Bitcoin and open source software. And I think you both pulled on a lot of these threads that I knew we would in this conversation. So I think people will really enjoy this. But before we jump off, the next few months, the next year, what are you both excited about in terms of, we talked about some of it, but in terms of Nostr, in terms of open source social media protocols, what are some of the things you both are most excited about in this space?
Well, I'm excited about the great convergence of all these different open protocols and these open systems. I'm excited about actually using all this new large language model stuff, especially if it's open source and controlled by users. I'm excited about the fact that we have the opportunity to rebuild the entire sort of enclosed, centralized social media stack of all the different apps in an open way. And this is something that we've known, at least I've known, that we wanted for 15 years, but now we get to do it.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, and I think partly we get to do it because we just have that all these amazingly qualified free and open source developers. There wasn't that many developers before, and there wasn't that many free and open source developers before, but it's like an army in these permissionless developer environments, just building all this client software. So it's incredible to see with Nostr. And I would truly think that Nostr is like it's the everything app of freedom. So I want to see more applications and being used in some more interesting ways. I want to see the development of good reputation solutions for reputation systems, because I think that's kind of like a missing piece to the puzzle. There's some great proposals on that. It's obviously a very hard problem to solve, but there are some great proposals which could be functional. And I think as soon as you get reputation, then you have Ubers, and then you have better marketplaces. And I actually want, like, just like, with Bitcoin, we try and give unbanked people access to Bitcoin. We like the idea of unbanked people having access to Bitcoin. I think, like, industries and services which don't have like software solutions built for them be having access to free and open source software and having more autonomy, I think could empower them and could make their working scenario safer. So I really feel like Nostr could be very powerful for like sex workers, for example. And I want to see more people building, particularly if you have reputation systems on both sides of the trade. And it could be get very good for safety and stuff. So I kind of want to see more of that. I want to see just blue sky thinking in Bitcoin in Nostr for different clients and building that everything app of freedom.
Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. That might be the name of this episode, is the Nostr, the everything app of freedom. Well, we also talked about a dozen different things, so we'll see about title. But thank you both so much for jumping on. Before we jump off, because people sometimes won't read the show notes, Ben and Rabble, do you want to tell people where they can follow you, where they can look into things you're working on and care about?
Sure. I mean, nos.social, nos.social is my Nostr app. And I'm Rabble on Nostr. If there's a bunch of different ways you can look me up, and on all the other different social media platforms. And yeah, I post on Nostr all the time, talking about what we're working on and what we're building. And I'm excited to engage in a larger conversation.
Cool.
So yeah, Ben Arc, if you can get to, all my sort of social networks that way on Nostr, ben at nostr.com. I think that's pretty much it. Check out LM Bits. We've got a bunch of great extensions in there for running your own relays, those sorts of things. And it's pretty easy to run. So yeah, check it out. Yeah, but Ben Arc.
Awesome. Ben, real quick before I forget too, I know, is it still listed, nostr.com, for sale? I know you had put up notes trying to sell the domain, the very highly coveted nostr.com.
It was really interesting, the sort of the response and the feedback from the community of people. I mean, a lot of people were concerned, which of course they should be. I've been in Nostr for like a long time, and I'm here to make the world a better place. And I'm not going to go selling that domain to some corrupt body, entity, person, or whatever. I just thought, I was like, if Roger Ver back in 2013 had put Bitcoin.com on the market, and some better player had bought it and done something more useful with it, like, would that have been a good thing? I mean, am I the best person to have this thing? So I put it up. For a ridiculous amount of money. I had a lot of interest from shitcoiners because they seem to have really fat bags.
So you did get a lot of interest. What was it? 5 million? What'd you say?
I can talk. Yeah, I can talk. I had a bunch of Solana guys reach out to me, and they wanted $5 million. And I guess they would make like a Nostr ICO or something, and they would probably make a ton of money. Yeah. But so yeah, no, that's not happening. I know, exactly. It's painful, isn't it? But with LM Bits, we have the company LM Bits Inc. And we made the company to kind of give us an excuse to work more on the software and build products based on the software. Just, that classic dynamic between like WordPress.com and WordPress.org.
Yep.
As a way of kind of funding development, but then also, like actually having a use case where we're kind of second guessing. We're building an accounts wallet system, but we aren't actually running it for anything ourselves. We're just kind of second guessing what people want. So we did that with LM Bits, and I think what's going to happen, because I don't just want to be the sole owner of Nostr.com or manager of Nostr.com. The arrangement I have with FiatJaff is he can just put whatever he wants on any subdomain and help manage the main page. But then we want to have some services. So like we want a Nostr.com relay, and we want to also probably sell the NIP5s. And then we'll use that then to just fund a small team, which can try and make the site as useful as possible without selling out or being evil. But yeah, it's
an important way It's important because people don't know, like, when you just like hear about Nostr, you're going to go to Nostr.com, and see it. So
yeah. For the ClearNet people, like it's their first point of contact, isn't it? And it's still with Bitcoin.com now, because that's, I don't know if you know, Rabble, that's in the hands of someone who moved away from Bitcoin and created a separate thing. But he claims that separate thing is Bitcoin. So now we have this Bitcoin.com thing. And honestly, a lot of people, they Google Bitcoin, they end up on Bitcoin.com, and then they end up buying this this forked version of Bitcoin. So we wouldn't want that type of thing to happen with Nostr. So it's something we've experienced before in the Bitcoin community, and it is a very powerful domain for that reason. It's where people do end up. So yeah, it's not something I take lightly. And hopefully now, so we're gonna take the domain, we're gonna give it to LMBits to manage, which means we can build a small team and we can try and make it useful, build some services on it, and then it's not just something I have to worry about then.
Wait.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. Appreciate you both sticking on and having such a good conversation. I think people will really enjoy. Go and check out their work, follow them on socials, engage, interact. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you too. And we'll have to do this again sometime. This was fun. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
Bye.